Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. I'm your host Hannah Zaberi and welcome back to another episode of Justice for All Now. Thank you for joining us on Muslim Network TV, America's only Muslim-focused network. You're always welcome to watch us 24/7 on Samsung Galaxy 19, Amazon Fire, Roku TV, and soon Apple TV. Last week, we discussed the Supreme Court ruling on the DACA program with Hassan Ahmad, and Luis Aguilar, and the Trump administration's attempt to abolish it. Today, we're going to look at another aspect of this discussion around immigration, particularly ICE. Before Donald Trump, only immigrants and their neighbors were likely to know what the acronym ICE stood for: Immigration and Custom Enforcement. The agency assigned with identifying, detaining, and deporting people in the United States who have violated immigration law. Under Trump, it became a household name, even in the households that don't have to worry about its agents knocking on their doors. Now, this is quite a and it's not fair to, I would say, to put it all, blame all of President ICE on President Trump. President Obama is known as the deporter in chief, and ICE worked around the country, around the clock, deporting people. As people on the ground carrying out Trump's deportation agenda, ICE agents have become known to many the face of the administration's worst impulses. So basically, the network that was set up by the Obama administration has just been used much more vigorously by the Trump administration, and sometimes much more. It's shown more on mainstream media, whereas mainstream media kind of ignored it under the Obama administration. They're the rogue agency. Rumors and reports of ICE raids have rippled through communities and social media with regularity. Arrests of parents recorded on their children's cell phone cameras have provoked nationwide outrage, according to Vox. Joining us today is Angel Romero. Angel and his sister were brought to the United States by their parents when they were only toddlers. They settled in Virginia, largely unaware of their immigration status, until they reached high school age, where President Obama initiated the DACA program. Angel and his sister became involved with CASA in action, where they now help to create a new Virginia. Thank you so much for being here, Angel. We're really
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, we're happy to have you on. I know last week you were at a rally, and so you couldn't make it, and we didn't want the conversation to go forward without you. So we're really happy to have you here. So I'd love to hear more about your story, and I'm sure our those people watching us will too. So tell us more about yourself and on your unique experiences with immigration, DACA, and even ICE.
So, as the intro said, I came here when I was 2, and growing up, I was, for the most part, unaware of what it meant to be undocumented. I didn't have any, I had some ideas because of the county that I grew up in having an agreement with ICE, and I would grow up being told to keep certain things secret, not talk about where I was born, stuff like that. But I largely didn't know that I was undocumented until the DACA program was put in place by President Obama. And then that's when I started to really figure out, I'm undocumented, and I figured out what that meant for me.
I think I was muted. So now, when we look at everything that is going on, and especially let's talk about a little bit about the Supreme Court ruling that the Supreme Court has said that the president could not and should not cannot dissolve DACA the way he intended to. But this ruling overshadows actually the very extreme human rights violations that take place under when immigrants come into the United States that are occurring in the hands of ICE. And sometimes I don't even understand why we use the terminology immigrants, because a lot of people that are coming in are actually refugees. And so I'd love to get your thoughts on that. Why are the people who cross over the border, who are trying to escape war and famine and all sorts of egregious violence in their own countries, are trying to cross over, and they're not called refugees?
Yes, that's part of the whole system that we create this whole separate class of immigrants, where there's people who like in one case that I know, I have a family friend who came from Honduras, escaping domestic violence, and something that she had to endure was being separated from her baby. She had an infant with her that she was bringing over with her because she was escaping the violence, and she wanted to protect her child from that violence. But in the process, she was detained at the border, and she was separated from that infant. And the infant, when they were eventually reunited, and they're living here in the country. But when at first we saw the child, it was it looked like it looked like no child should ever look, because it was apparent that they weren't feeding it what it needed to be fed. And I heard also that they were apparently using drugs to sedate the children to make sure that they don't to control their behavior and keep them sedated.
And this is so true when the news comes in, right? There's this incredible uproar when people see these pictures of the detention camps and they see children in cages, and there's a huge uproar at that time. But then we understand how news media works. So another episode will occur somewhere else, and all the cameras start going there, and people stop following up on that immediate outrage that was when as a response to seeing those images. So what happens afterwards? Like what though that issues it erases the narratives of these families, just like you were sharing about your friend, right, whose child, like, these are actual families, these are people who have suffered extreme human rights violations. And I also feel like Americans become uncomfortable with the fact that this is happening in their own country. It's easy to say, oh, that human rights violation that's occurring in Nigeria or in China, but we don't want to talk about what's actually happening in our own backyards. And so if you could say something to people who choose to ignore the issue because they feel too uncomfortable to talk about, what would you say?
I would say to people who feel too uncomfortable to face the reality of the situation, that once once the cameras aren't on this, that it's still happening. It's not just a story of the week and we move on to something else, and that it goes hand in hand with so many other things that we're seeing here today. For example, with COVID, people in the detention centers, they're not being given the proper precautions in order to be protected from COVID. There's COVID outbreaks in those camps, and with Black Lives Matter, there's lots of Black immigrants who are bearing the brunt of this, especially as a result of the over policing in those communities.
Mm-hmm. So, and you said something about the conditions inside the camp. So, can you describe some of those conditions from the work that you work for CASA in Action? What are some of the stories that you've heard, and especially before COVID, and now being even more worsened by COVID.
Yes, before COVID, the situations were already horrible. Um, they're um, as you see in the images, the camps are cold metal rooms with the only cover they're given is basically this tinfoil sheet that you see.
Mm-hmm.
And during COVID, what you see is that they are being packed into rooms together, and diseases spread in those um, detention centers. And it's really inhumane seeing how people are just being treated like that. And
Do they have access to lawyers? What happens once they're in the camps or in the centers?
there's a real lack of transparency when it comes to the camps
Mm-hmm.
and the detention centers because um, they don't release a lot of the data of what happens with them. So some I assume that some of them who are in deportation proceedings, um, they I know that children in general they're being made to represent themselves in their own
Mm-hmm.
deportation proceedings, and that's just insanity. Thinking about having a child represent themselves in a court of law.
You know, as if you don't mind, if you could share your family's experiences living under ICE, because it's not only just the people who get detained crossing the border, it's also people who are living here, who have lives here, who have pay taxes, and even if they didn't pay taxes, just are living their lives. um, what is it like living under ICE?
So living under ICE is basically you have to walk on eggshells in order to make sure that you don't get separated from your families. Like what happened to one of my family members that I had who was separated from his children.
Mhm.
Luckily, they were reunited, but it was a whole, I think it was 6 months of having um, those children. Basically, they didn't have a father for 6 months,
Mm.
and um, what was really sad to me is I would have to babysit them, and you could see in their eyes that they just had such a deep sense of sadness with them.
Oh, so those stories that we hear, like of kids who are scared to go to school because you know. So has COVID impacted any of these ICE raids? Are they taking place as often as they were before COVID?
I don't have any confirmation of this, but I have heard of ICE taking advantage of people being in their homes
Mm.
um, and using that to their advantage to get people at their homes.
Gosh, so what happens to the children who get left behind? Where do they go?
Um, it's a case by case basis. For example, my family members, those children were staying with their mom, who luckily didn't get taken away as well. But not everyone is so lucky.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard one story of a woman who was fostering or had adopted 1,000 children in papers because there was nobody who was the legal guardian of these 1,000 kids in, I believe she was in New Mexico or Texas, I'm not sure, but it was very close to the border, and none of these children had actual guardians, and so she was taking, literally in a legal sense, was taking care of them, being, making sure they were going to their hearings and all of that. So it's a pretty terrible situation. Some people call for, like, the immigration system of ICE to be reformed, while others call for complete abolishment. Some recommend breaking up ICE, but reorganizing it into separate offices. So I think even some ICE agents are calling for that. Where do you stand on the spectrum and why?
I believe in uh, the abolishment of ICE because if we just reform it or um, replace it with something that goes by a different name, but it's still ICE, it's the same atrocities are still going to be happening. Um, Such as before ICE existed, we still had family separation happening, and it's still something that would happen if we change the name and um, rebrand ICE into something else.
What does abolishing ICE mean? Like what does that mean in real terms? Like complete so there would be no immigration. Like so what would happen at the, you know, when like you fly into a lot of people think ICE is the same thing as who mans like airports and stuff, but that's
Yeah,
not the case, right? Those are two
so
separate.
yeah, yeah. There's separate agencies that deal with different things.
Mhm.
ICE is basically just um, internally they go after families that live here, and um, the other agencies that deal with stuff like airport security, the TSA, they're completely different. And that's a whole nother conversation to be had about whether or not we should completely abolish every single system, um, because all of the systems do play hand in hand with each other. And we see that the problem is systemic, something that um, came up in conversations with the community while we were discussing the Supreme Court decision is that we were very aware of how even if we achieve the full immigration reform, we're still going to have a lot of systems against us. Even if we're
Mhm.
all citizens, we're still going to be facing a lot of the same oppressions that um, people of color who are citizens face.
Face. You know, when we talk about ICE and abolishment, so one of the things that has, you know, a lot of counties have is in Virginia or Maryland or other states around the country, they have contracts with ICE. And the police sometimes works together. Can you explain to us how that works? And recently, in your area, there was a massive push to divest from ICE. So how did that work out? Like, what was that called? What was that push called? Or
Yeah.
what was that law called?
So in Virginia, Prince William County, we had an agreement between the county and ICE. That agreement was called 287G,
Mhm.
and basically, it allowed um, police officers to act as ICE agents, and
Mhm.
they were using county money, our tax dollars. We were basically paying for them to separate our families, ruin our economy, because I was living in the county. Um, I was in elementary school when that happened,
Mhm.
and I remember seeing how it affected families, how it affected my family to the point that we had to move out of the county, and
So
we
what
had
does
to
that
escape
mean? A
that.
police officer acting like an ICE agent.
Mhm.
So if I was walking down the street, would you have to carry papers with you? Like, how did that work out in a practical terms?
When it first was put into place, it was like that. It was sort of a stop and frisk situation where
Mm.
the police officers would stop people because they looked undocumented or illegal. And um, eventually it changed, and I'm not sure when that happened, but um, it was only inside of the jails that once someone was inside of the jail, they would be turned over to ICE immediately. without any due process, and that was a big part of why the county jail board decided to let the program expire, and it
Mhm.
actually expires today.
Yay! So we're
Yes.
solid. So that should be something. Congratulations. So that's been, and that didn't just happen like, oh, because they decided that it was something horrible. How much what all went behind the count Prince William's County getting out of 287G? What else? What went behind that?
Yes. Getting ICE out of Prince William County was a 13-year long process that started since 2007. When it was first been put into place, um, there was a whole movement to try to prevent it from happening.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, because of the makeup of the local government, it still went through. But in those 13 years, we've changed the face of Prince William, and
Mm.
specifically CASA in Action through their electoral work, which I'm proud to say that I was a part of.
Mhm.
Um, we were able to change the county's board of supervisors and elect people who we knew were going to get rid of this program. And um, luckily now this program is history.
That is amazing. That this is something that advocates and activists all over the world need to learn from. Like, imagine, and a lot of times we look at global issues, like look at programs that affect. You can make change in your town. You can make change in your cities. You can make change in your counties. It took 13 years of consistent advocacy, and now today we can celebrate that 287G. And I remember there were hours of testimony and people like, so protests, testimonies, electoral changing up who actually runs for office, right? All of that contributed to this decision. So it wasn't just like, oh, one group or one person went and expected that change to happen. So this is very, very powerful, and a reminder to never give up. And you consistently keep working on it. That's just, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm so glad you're here today, and
Yeah.
then we can celebrate that. And I hope people across the country can learn how you can do this. You can make change in your local counties. I wanted to talk about, when we, recently a federal judge ordered that all immigrant children, we were talking about children earlier, be released from custody by July 17th to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Um, but ICE in the past, ICE has been hesitant to release children because they believe they would be viewed badly if they released a child without their parent. So this almost makes me feel like they're trying to keep as many immigrants in custody as possible. So I'd love to get your take on that.
Yes, that's exactly what ICE is doing. They're trying to keep it as many immigrants as possible in custody, and they're just using the excuse of really not wanting to release the um, children without their parents.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they actually cared, they wouldn't separate them while
Mm-hmm.
they were in custody. And also, then if they actually cared about the children, they wouldn't be disappearing so many children, because there's so many missing children that we have no idea what's happening to those children.
So, who is there anybody who's following, tracing these children? Is there groups or nonprofits or anybody who knows where these children are or tracing them?
As far as I know, I don't know any names of any organizations that are tracing them, but I'm sure there is. But in terms of accountability, there is basically no accountability for ICE, because they work basically outside of the law.
Mm.
They they have been given so much power by not only this administration, but previous administrations that have incrementally built on that power, to the point that we have children being disappeared without any accountability for that.
And there's been cases where children have been assaulted, sexually
Yeah.
assaulted, and children, and like 8-year-old taking care of a baby, and it's just, and I know I can tell you this, from my point of view. It has made it so much harder to do human rights work in the United States, because before, there was at least this um, aura around, like, oh, United States is the leader in human rights work and all of that. But now people just look back at us like, fix your own backyard before you come and tell us what to do, right? And it has that leadership the United States had in the past is just really has deteriorated. And this is something that people who are living here need to really, like, we and really take a look inside and see what we're doing to people. And I know in that case, like, CASA does amazing work, and we'd love to learn more about the work CASA is doing, how people can get involved. So for our viewers who don't know much about CASA, and what would you like to share about the mission of CASA and why it's relevant to ICE and immigration in America today?
Yes. Something that I want to highlight that you said is that I really feel that this year is a year where we're really examining this myth about American exceptionalism that a lot of us, like since I grew up in this country, I was raised on that myth,
Mm,
and we're really examining what it means. And the veil is being lifted on so many things that have been covered up, such as the atrocities that are happening with ICE. Um, and in terms of CASA, what CASA does is CASA in Action is the political side, which is what I've been involved with in prior years. And CASA in Action is the um, Mid Atlantic region's premier um, immigrants' rights electoral organization, where um, we work to elect candidates who will fight for the rights of immigrants and working class families. And
mm,
we um, are based in 3 different states: Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. And um, we have been in this fight in not only Prince William, but those 3 states, making sure that we don't get any policies like 287G ever again.
mm. I know it's a tough fight. We had that fight here in Howard County, um, in Maryland, with the Maryland Trust Act, and the amount of vitriol that we got from within the immigrant community was unbelievable. So there's this big divide between immigrants versus immigrants, or the good immigrants versus the bad immigrants, and there's that whole narrative on that. So what would be your, like, how do you counter that, and how do you get more people involved?
Something that how you counter that is really just having those conversations, because I know even within immigrant families you see that um, and you see that there is a great need for us educating other immigrants on these issues and
Mhm.
letting them know that um, not everyone had the opportunity to go the right way, as many people like to say. Um, and luckily, I'm seeing a change within the community. Slowly, we're getting there, but I do think that we can unite not just within the immigrant community, but amongst all marginalized all marginalized groups.
Mm. And when we keep, like, a lot of times when we're discussing these issues, we're so immigrants make up a large part of the workforce. And I have seen some, like, actions where people are like, okay, a day without an immigrant, like, let's no one shows up for work, and then that would affect the economy. So what are some effective tools that CASA has used in your advocacy, like what you have seen that has really brought results, like effective actions?
Mhm. Some a couple of effective actions that we've done is uh, um, is having the community themselves be the ones at the forefront. The people who are affected are the ones that are speaking on these issues,
Mm.
and um, also CASA's electoral program allows us to make sure that we vet who gets into office, and um, we make sure that they are people who will lead with compassion and have the interests of the community in mind.
Training people how to run, or is it, how do you choose? So explain this to me because I'm not understanding what does that mean?
Um, Gas in action. Basically, um, we basically endorse a candidate which is chosen by our members. So our members choose which candidates to endorse, and
Mhm.
then CASA goes and knocks on doors in those candidates'
And
districts,
help. Okay.
and
So
helps determine.
is CASA a PAC? Is it a
Yeah,
political action committee?
yeah,
Okay, I got you. I got you. So
that's actually.
CASA itself is a nonprofit that, because I
Mm,
know that they do a lot of like workforce enablers, like trainings and all of that, plus immigrant advocacy, rights advocacy. But CASA in Action is a PAC that helps
yes.
people get elected. Okay,
Mm,
gotcha. That's a good distinction to make, is that there's two, so there is the part that is advocacy work, and then there is the part that is actually electoral work. So what has been, so you've been involved in knocking on doors, and now elections are coming up again. So how has that experience been?
it's been very powerful because I started out with Gas in Action, and like Luis, who was on last week, I also came to CASA because I needed to get my DACA, I to do my DACA application, and so I got involved from CASA to CASA in Action, and um, that's how I became a canvasser, and then eventually I was a canvas manager, and I was able to lead a team of young, mostly immigrants or child of immigrants, who I was able to show them this is how our system works. This is what how elections work. This is whose district you live in, because a lot of our youth don't know
No.
um, what actually goes on within politics because our education system fails them.
Mm. So what would you tell youth? How do you encourage them into getting involved?
I'd tell you, so I tell youth that um, to really look at starting with the local level, because local politics is where you can have the most immediate impact and see what's happening in the local level. Show up to town halls, show up to school board meetings, because a lot of those decisions get made there that impact
Mm.
what um, what schools get funding, and we see whether or not we get funding for schools um, where it's mostly students of color.
Mm. So if you ever got to the point where you could run for office, would you run?
That's something that I've considered. Um, right now, I'm at a point where I don't think, like today, if I was eligible to run, which because of my immigration status, I can't run.
Hmm.
I I wouldn't run right now because um, I um, believe that I'm able to have a greater impact um, working directly with the community,
I
which
see.
is um,
So, what are some of the lessons that you've learned working with the community?
yeah, something that I've learned is really like getting to know that there's such a diversity within the immigrant community
Mm-hmm.
that we all come from different backgrounds, but we all have the same shared struggle that we all um, have. We all face this same oppression that um, is placed upon us by these systems.
Hmm. So, this is something that I really like. Suppose all the viewers who may be watching us, and they're concerned about this because perhaps someone in their own family may be affected by their immigration status. Because a lot of times people think that this is not a Muslim issue, and this is a Muslim issue. One, because Muslims should stand up for our, every all our neighbors, and for their human rights. Now, number two, there are many Latinos that are Muslim, and number three, because this is, there's several other communities that are affected by this as well, including the African community. There's Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi. Like I could go on. Somali community. There's so many communities that are affected by immigration, and to make this about one ethnicity, I believe that harms all of us, and not be working on this affects all immigrants of every citizenship or like immigration status. So because when somebody gets up on a platform and calls like people, human beings, illegal, or they call, like they compare human beings to like inhuman things, right? Like animals. That is dehumanizing to all of us, right? So I want you to, so suppose you met me knocking on doors, what would you tell me to do, Angel, to get involved with immigration rights?
So I would tell you that there to get involved with like showing up, like I said, to local things. Um, Also, we have different events going on, such as the Unity March Against Hate, which is something that local leaders from Virginia decided that we needed to unite against hate, regardless of whether you're a citizen, whether you're Hispanic, whether you're Black,
Mhm.
Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and we all have to band together.
Mhm.
And um, the original plan for the Unity March Against Hate was to march from Prince William to Charlottesville,
Mhm.
and we were going to do that on the anniversary of the Charlottesville riots, where we sadly lost a life as a result of hatred.
Mhm.
Um, Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, um, the march won't be happening this year. Instead, what we're going to do is on the 4th of July, we're going to have a car caravan. It's
Okay.
the same Prince William to Charlottesville,
Mhm.
and um, the page is Unity March Against Hate, and you'll be able to see um, the details on the Facebook page. Um, Also, something that as individuals we could participate in is an economic blackout to support our um, Black brothers and sisters who are still facing police brutality. We
Mhm.
um, On 4th of July, there is going to be a boycott of the economy where we are not going to be spending anything on the 4th of July.
Okay. Hmm.
And yeah.
What is that initiative called? Is there hashtags or something that we can take a look
Um, so for the Unity March Against Hate, it's hashtag Unity March Against Hate. And for the economic blackout, I believe the hashtag is um, um, I actually don't remember the hashtag, but
at?
um, yeah.
Okay. No, thank you for this information. And this is so important for those of you who are going to be spending 4th of July under COVID. Like this is under a pandemic. There's still, imagine you might be safe in your home, but there are many, many families who might be your neighbors, who may live down, shop in the same grocery stores that you do, go to the same schools as you do, and they are living in fear because of a knock on that door could mean the end of their family as they know it. And so many, powerful lessons to learn from this that it really, you don't, just the fact that you're a dreamer and yet you still, you know make it out every day and are knocking on those doors and you're not afraid. That is, that's like the biggest thing that I'm like learning talking to you, is that living under ice doesn't mean that you have to live with that fear. You're fighting against that fear, and so that those families that are living in fear can be out, can stay a family. And so that, so as we wrap up, I'd love to get your final thoughts on perhaps, what keeps you going.
Yeah. As you say that it's really powerful to be unafraid, and there's this common chant that you hear at immigration rallies, that's undocumented, unafraid,
Hmm.
and that's really helped me because I haven't always been unafraid to speak about my immigration status for the longest time, um, all the way up to high school. I was ashamed of my immigration status. That it was
Hmm.
something that I had to keep hidden and silent about. And I hope that by being vocal about what I face, that I hope that other immigrants who maybe don't um, feel the same way that I feel, um, don't feel um, unafraid, that they feel inspired to speak up.
Definitely. No, your effort and your just being out there is extremely inspiring. Keep doing the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And to the audience out there, we need to learn from from an Angel and others like him who are not afraid, and they're not afraid of being out there and fighting for their rights. And all of us, if we feel even an inch of just like we feel for our brothers and sisters in Burma or in China or in East Turkestan, as well India, all the other places that we are consistently talking about and fighting for, we need to make sure that our hearts are open to the struggles of our neighbors right here in this country. So thank you for joining us today. On Muslim Network TV, America's only Muslim focused network. You can always watch us 24/7 on Samsung Galaxy 19, Amazon Fire, Roku TV, and soon Apple TV. Assalamu alaikum.